This is CRM Audio, the Dynamics 365 podcast with George Dubinsky, Joel Lindstrom, and Sean the CRM Hobbit Tabor. This episode is sponsored by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integrations affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 70 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. We thank KingswaySoft for sponsoring CRM Audio, the Dynamics 365 podcast. So, this is our third anniversary. Gentlemen, you have cake or hats or party favors?
I have donuts.
And all the listeners out there, feel free to go get some cake to celebrate.
That's right.
And so let's see. We got a guest here. Who's our guest?
Hey, good morning.
Oh, it's Lucas Alexander.
Well, and it may not be morning when you listen to this. So hello, everyone. Lucas Alexander here.
And Lucas, what kind of cake or food is appropriate for celebrating the third anniversary of a Dynamics podcast?
I think you need something really spectacular, like they would have had at the royal wedding. Just imagine something like that, and then one step up. That's what you need.
Gotcha.
And put on a nice hat when you eat it.
Absolutely. So, okay, here's a question, memory lane, without looking. What was the topic of our first episode?
OneNote integration.
Yeah, the worst feature to talk about as a subject of a podcast.
Yeah, that if you go back and listen to that episode, whoo, that's a rough one. Yeah.
Although I did, I believe I was right in the discussion about how you couldn't send CRM forms to OneNote.
Yes, it's true. This is true. But it was kind of humorous that that we tried very hard to be excited about that feature.
A feature which I've used all of probably twice since then, and can only remember 2 customers ever implementing it.
Yeah. Agreed.
Is that
yeah,
because people don't get excited about OneNote in general, or because the integration
It's because
sucks?
it's pretty worthless. I mean, it's having the link to a shared OneNote is valuable, but the way it only shows the sections is just kind of weird to me.
But remember, I even milked the tip out of it for tip of the day, saying that how to hide the information. You just introduce, I don't remember, subsections or subpages or something like this, and they just disappear into the void. They don't show up.
I think the customers that I tried working with they didn't like it because it went somewhere else. They wanted to stay in Dynamics, so that was the pushback I've gotten. But
okay, so if you want to learn more about that feature and hear a really bad episode, go back and listen to episode 1. Well, the big day's coming. We all know what day we're talking about, right? GDPR Day.
That's correct.
Or a G Day, it was called by somebody. Lucas, how are you celebrating GDPR Day?
Royal wedding cake, but just step down a level.
Here's what GDPR means to me so far. A bunch of really annoying emails from services that I forgot I used, telling me that they've updated their terms of service.
Yeah, I used it to unsubscribe from a bunch of services. I said, I didn't know I used that and that. And these guys.
No, you can't have my information anymore. That is a nice way to do it. That's for sure.
Right.
But I found an interesting side thing on GDPR, unrelated to Dynamics, but apparently it's significantly impacting the way that video games are designed because of the way that when you play video games now on the consoles or on PC, it does have to capture some bit of information so that when you go to certain places in the game, you get certain like loot crates or prize chests, things like that. And then they try to market to you to buy the next downloadable content or things of this nature. And there's actually a couple games that shut down because of GDPR. They said it's cheaper for us to shut the game down than to go with GDPR.
Were these well-known games, or were these just throwaway kind of games?
No, I wouldn't say they were well-known games. Unless you subscribe to the same video game podcast that I do, you probably would never have known about them. So, but I just thought that was interesting to, outside of our world, it's a really big thing with a lot of impact. So,
okay. So next, Sean, you want to give us the news? I guess since we're now in the broader world of the business application platform, or BAP as we call it, let's call this the BAP news.
The BAP news, sure. So we recently had I believe it was in Atlanta, we had the App-in-a-Day roadshow, where you basically learned how to build a canvas and a model-driven app in a day. I wasn't able to attend. You were there, Joel, and a couple of our other friends were there. And from the content that I've seen from it, it's very good. It actually, oddly enough, and I don't know why I couldn't get over this hurdle, it actually helped me remove some confusion about model-driven apps. But the content is very good. It really does walk you through how to. Is very good. It really does walk you through how to build collections, whether they're static through a Excel spreadsheet or a database like a SQL table. So very, very cool App-in-a-Day roadshow. There's more of these coming across the country. So if you happen to see one of these in your area, I definitely encourage you to attend. And we'll have a link to how to get more information about that in the show notes.
Yeah, it was really good. I went and, but Sean, I believe when you went through the hands-on labs, the light bulb went off and you told me, hey, this model-driven app is CRM. And I said, yeah, that's what I told you.
Yeah, but see, saying it is one thing. Actually trying to build it and implement it is another. Because when we first talked about the CDS 2.0 and the Power Apps announcement, it was like, yeah, it's a model-driven app is XRM. Yeah, okay, I get it. But then when you're actually trying to build it in practice, that's when it's like, well, wait, this is a lot simpler than I thought. Because when you first look at Power Apps, Canvas versus model, there's a kind of a inherent perception of built-in complexity when you go from Canvas to model, right? But in reality, it's just XRM. So
I got a kick out of the people from Microsoft talking about it, because it was like they were talking to Power Apps people about, this new thing, model-driven apps. You can have a data model, and it's like all these, and you can do calculated fields, and so it was like a total. It was like bizarro CRM world where it's like, like the way we talk about Canvas apps is like them talking about model-driven apps.
Right.
But it was good. The scenarios, if you get a chance to go, and they've added a lot more dates for this, and also I noticed the pre-day of the Business Application Summit. You can go through the App-in-a-Day there as well. So you get a chance to, because what it does, it takes a scenario through, I believe, 4 or 5 different hands-on labs that all build on each other. And when you go through the whole process, you build a Canvas app, you connect it to CDS, you add pieces in CDS, which will be, if you're people that do CRM configuration, will be old hat, and then adding flow in there. So I think even if you are familiar with the model-driven or dynamics piece of it, seeing how it all fits together and building an app end-to-end scenario is really good. I believe David Yak was involved in creating some of the content. It's really good.
Yeah, and what was great about it for me was the different little pieces and parts of Power Apps that I have not played with, and seeing how easy it was to move through that, and and really design that form and make it intuitive, and you can on the fly do the previews and see how things are working. I really liked it a lot.
So how about you, Lucas and George? Have you Actually, I'm saying George Lucas. Have you played with model-driven apps and Canvas apps?
I haven't done model-driven apps. I think when
Yes,
when
you have
the
it,
whole
CRM.
well, right. When the whole Dynamics 365 and we've got Power Apps and we've got Flow and all these things came out, what was it, a year and a half ago now, 2 years ago, it seems, jumped in and looked at Canvas apps and said, this seems interesting. Kind of took that and said, all right, I get a feel for what it can and can't do, and I put it on the shelf. And then recently, in the past few months, people saying things like model-driven apps are XRM. And I thought, I have no idea what that actually means. And I finally dug in and started doing some research over the past couple of weeks. And I think it's kind of like what you were saying, Sean, at the class. You look at it and you say, oh, I get it now. And when I finally started reading and digging into it, I thought, oh, I get it now. Because I was thinking, wait a minute, I got to replace everything I've been doing and drop it in. I wasn't thinking Canvas app. I was just thinking, original Power App.
Right.
And I mean, frankly, going back to the original, here's the CDS, I thought, I don't need the CDS. We got CRM. I mean, this is
right.
But now I'm starting to get it. I'll be interested to see how the messaging, kind of evolves, or where Microsoft's going in that direction to take that to the masses. Particularly people like myself who I think aren't on the cutting edge of Dynamics 365. I mean, you guys are talking about, I got 9.2 in my environment. My day job is working on CRM 2015, on-prem still. So,
well, hey, that episode we did about OneNote integration would be really helpful to you.
It would. Let's see, this show's 3 years old. I'm not sure if the show predates the version, the install of CRM that I'm on.
Wow.
So we'll see.
That's not good.
So I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how everything kind of gets communicated. That okay, you've got CDS apps, you've got Power Apps. This is what it is. It's CRM. It's this. I thought, I read somebody's write-up, and I can't remember where I saw this last week, and I thought this is going somewhere to help ease the confusion. But I think I'm a smart enough guy, and it took me a really long time to get it. So I'll be interested to see how other people get it.
Well, and I think some of that comes with, if you've played with Power Apps with CDS 1.0, and it was a little, for me, it was a little bit more difficult to really get into. That perception, I think, carried over. And then once you make that realization that, oh, this is the same thing I've been working in for the last 5 years, it makes it so much easier. So
right, I think my hang up that I had to get over going through the process is I was approaching a Canvas app with my CRM configurator hat on, because I'm so used to how with Dynamics, some things that are pretty easy aren't necessarily that as easy in Power Apps, Canvas apps, such as you can't just click on a field and drag it somewhere else in the form layout, for example. But CRM or Dynamics 365 customer engagement or model-driven apps have a very tight layout. You can't do things that are just totally out of the box without really getting into development. Like if you got the standard field layouts and the sections and the tabs, but if you want to do something outside the box and have, remove those limitations on configuration, that's really Power Apps, Canvas apps are really that, where you can almost do whatever you want with the layout. But some of the things that you might be used to that are fairly easy, just drag the field over and put it in there and have the whole section and tab, have that whole metaphor for you. That's not necessarily there. But there are some other things that are then more limiting in Power Apps from working with the data model and certain types of fields, things like lookup fields and some of the things that are just so easy with D365. But it's not that one's good, one's bad. It's that we now have a fairly full answer for almost any line of business scenario.
Right. Agreed.
So I guess my question I have though is if everything is Power Apps these days, or that's what it's going to be. Everything is Power Apps. It feels a little bit like the everything is .NET from about 15 years ago. And I know one of the things like the Power Apps Azure Blob Storage connector, right? I was reading up on that since you sent that over, and took a look at it and said, oh, this is cool. This is cool in a Canvas app. Is this available in a model-driven app? I
think that's the next step. Is and Canvas apps have these 300 some connectors to other services like Dropbox and even Salesforce. Are those going to be exposed in model-driven apps too? Because that's where this really comes together, I think.
Right. If you can have really, I think, a convergence between the model-driven apps and the Canvas apps. And you could go in and say, well, my model-driven app is going to be my really rapid development platform, and I can create my schema, and then I can quickly create forms based on that, or I can do all the interesting things and kind of go off the beaten path with my Canvas apps, but I can still leverage the same capabilities between the two. I mean, to some extent, that would be really nice.
I think you can look at how you can embed a Canvas app in a Power BI dashboard and can have that Canvas app be filtered based on the data filters on the dashboard. That, I think, would be the first step, is complete that integration where you can embed a Canvas app inside of a form, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you want a section on there that is just a unique UI that has connections to pass in context to other services. That would be awesome.
Well, and how I'm also looking at it in one of my implementations is that very method, but then taking that Canvas app, and for certain users, that is their UI, right? Because they only do a certain subset of functionality. They don't need to be seeing everything in Dynamics CE. So it's kind of it's very cool that we have that framework now to where we can build that intuitive interface, very functional, very lean, with connectivity to the bigger system, so that others get that data that was entered through this Power App. So that to me is really where the rubber meets the road.
Aren't you doing something you call a Canvas app from Rescue, Sean?
Yes, that's what we're trying to do. We're going to have a button within Resco Mobile CRM and to launch the Power App.
Wow. So you just mentioned word intuitive. So you implying that Canvas apps intuitive, whilst model-driven apps are not?
No,
right?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, based on the business requirements that I have, the model-driven or the Canvas app that we're designing is a more intuitive interface based on their business objective. So they need to do 3 things and 3 things only. They don't need to navigate through the entirety of the mobile app or the entirety of Dynamics 365 CE. So we give them the 3 things that they need. It's very simple, quick and clean for them to get their work done, and then everybody else gets the data that they've entered.
Yeah, let me give you a scenario, and I think it's totally based on the business scenario, what the users need to do. Where in a lot of cases, if you look at sales, customer service, field service, the typical model-driven user interfaces we have are probably more intuitive and more complete for what they need to do. But working with a retail company that wants a clienteling app, so people walking off the street and have a way to easily enter their contact information or browse information about the company. Canvas app is a more intuitive UI than trying to squeeze that, and also from a licensing makes a lot more sense too.
Mm-hmm.
But having them work together would be complete. So how about you, George? What kind of awesome Canvas apps have you been building?
I've been looking at the way Dynamics has been presented at build. So you know what I'm talking about. Even though you're not developers, you are aware that Microsoft Build has just wrapped up.
Come on, Lucas is here. You can't say that this episode.
I'm talking
Lucas
to
is
you
the
two.
developer.
I don't mean our guests, right?
Why are you not talking to Lucas?
No, I'm talking to you two.
George recognizes I'm a kindred spirit. We came down on the same side in the citizen developer debate.
I'm directing it at you, Joel and Sean. That Microsoft Build been wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. For those of you who haven't been there, you can go online and watch pretty much all of it. With some exceptions, I suppose. The one thing interesting about this build was that Dynamics, for the first time in, well, I suppose in history of build, Dynamics world has been represented at build to a certain extent. Hasn't been number one thing or as visible as some other bits and bobs, but it was interesting that it had presence. It had I don't remember, 30 sessions all up or something like this. So there were breakouts and theater sessions. And I went to see one of the theater sessions. And it was really, really interesting how the positioning has changed. It wasn't something like, we have this Dynamics 365 customer engagement and this is what you can do with it. No, it was more like, hey guys, this thing, Power Apps, we talked about last year, and they did have some mentioning of Power Apps and how to rapidly build stuff and things like that. And said, remember we talked about this common data services and, model. Guess what you can do with it now? You can now build what's called model-driven apps. And I said, wait a minute. We had this for a decade or more, and it used to be called CRM, but then I realized, so what happening is like a Trojan horse. They're bringing in the world of Dynamics 365, the world that we've been living in for years. They're bringing it to other people who might come in from developer background, and they say, hey, look, these Power Apps, it's really interesting thing that you can develop, very quickly. It's kind of Microsoft Access for the mobile devices and things like that. And now you can rapidly build this model-driven apps that don't require you to design UI, and it's all pre-designed for you. You just slap the model together, you build UI around your model, and suddenly we've got influx of interest, an influx of people who have been building Power Apps for a year or maybe more, and now they're introduced to the world of guess what, CRM or XRM, and how to build the business level applications. So I thought that was an interesting take on how to introduce the rest of .NET world, or the rest of Scott Guthrie world, if you will, to our Dynamics world and bridge the two. We've always been trying to bridge it from Dynamics side of things, and while some of us are developers, it's actually, from my experience, it never worked out to the full. So it would be interesting to see if we do get kind of developers coming from the other side of the bridge and saying, hey, look, there is a really cool thing. Why don't we take a look, and why don't we start engaging more, and so on. So that was really, really interesting to see from this point of view. So it's kind of by stealth introducing Dynamics 365 into .NET world, as Lucas put it, by stealth. So we'll see what comes out of it. I don't see many opportunities to go other way around, primarily because I still maintain my notion that it is kind of on the verge of being the next Microsoft Access. That is, you give it to citizen developers and they run amok with it, and you end up with 55, CD collection databases in your organization in no time.
Yeah, see last episode for that discussion.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think looking at the messaging from Microsoft, it looks like Canvas apps are the answer to upgrade info path forms, and model-driven apps are the answer to upgrade people from access.
Yeah, it's kind of the other thing I find interesting. You were talking about how to bridge two worlds and how to make people, how to make people use one or another. Sean, I think you mentioned that you've got some customer with 200 dialogues, or someone was crying about it, right?
Yeah.
I think that Power Apps, in-context Power Apps, would be to a certain extent your replacement for dialogues.
I tried to get Charles Lamanna to say that when we interviewed him, but he wouldn't go that far. So one topic that I want to discuss was virtual entities. We've talked about them before, but there's recently been some stuff posted. Jason Latimer and Nutraj posted some things about using virtual entities in some unusual ways. One of them in the post specifically that I'll put in the show notes is using virtual entities to expose data in the same Dynamics environment that isn't available from Advanced Find. And specifically things like the recently viewed items data, because that's in the system, but if you want to access it and see what records people have been accessing, you can't access it via Advanced Find, where virtual entities can be accessed via Advanced Find. So that struck me as really interesting, and I wanted to ask you, developer types, have you done any kind of unusual stuff with virtual entities, or what do you think about this idea?
Oh, the idea is great. The idea itself is great, but Lucas, you kind of on-prem. You live in on-prem world. What's the word about virtual entities in on-prem world?
Well, we don't have them yet, but we want them because there are tons of things we're doing where we're really trying to bring in what I'll call tabular data from other systems, and I think it would be a great fit for virtual entities. So what we've done, and I think we'll continue to do a lot of, is I create some sort of shadow entity in my CRM instance that looks like the data, and then on retrieves and retrieve multiples, I have to go out, execute a plugin and modify the response from the platform to inject the data in, and that works okay. I think that's sort of a weird solution for people to wrap their heads around, though, who don't kind of live and breathe from the development perspective. So wait, I've got an entity and there's nothing in it. What am I doing with this? How does this work? So I like that virtual entities are a thing, and I would like to be able to use them in an on-prem solution, because I think people would be able to wrap their heads around it a little bit better. And it would probably make things a little bit smoother from the overall implementation perspective.
What do you think, George? You were looking
interesting
about a
that
way to tie two CRM environments together. What you found some problems with that, though, right?
Correct. There are a couple of things. We were talking about one of our challenges for the bad master class is, in fact, around virtual entities, so involves virtual entities, and we've been trying to come up with a really good case use scenarios for the virtual entities, and this is a brilliant one. I have to say that in the article, Jason and Nutraj, they're talking about different scenarios of getting access to the entities that to the data that otherwise not exposed in your own system. This is really interesting. We honestly haven't discussed these particular scenarios. There are a couple gotchas we discovered when trying to do different things with virtual entities. One is your external system need to have some kind of identifying the records, right? So it's would it be particular for legacy systems Lucas was talking about, like appointment systems and things like that? That would be extremely unusual to have a unique identifier on each record, right? So, and that's one of the requirements for virtual entities. You have to have, if you implement and retrieve, right, then you do need to have a unique identifier for each record. You don't have to implement. You can implement retrieve multiple and be done. But if you do implement retrieve and you want more details about this appointment, then you do need this GUID. There are a couple of ways around it. If the other system does have the key, then you can try to, create a hash of this key that is kind of GUID, but it's not guaranteed to be unique. Disclaimer, apply disclaimers and things like that. But the bottom line is you need to have this. Identifier. So that's the catch number one. So the catch number, you can't just suck in data from the other system and be happy with it. You need to be able to identify records. The other gotcha we discovered, I have to take back all the scenarios I've been tooting and saying, hey, look, if you have two Dynamics 365 systems, you need to bring just an entity from one system to another, let's say cross departments, you just need to bring read-only data from another department and that's it. Sounds like a great idea. The problem is that you live inside the plugin, and inside the plugin you do get connection to your own instance. You don't get connection to the other instance. And what we discovered is that it's virtually impossible to authenticate to the other instance. You can't bring XRM tooling libraries to get IOC service and things like that. And if you try to call a web API, you're going to fall flat as well on your face because you won't be able to. So there's some kind of all sort of challenges around just talking to another instance from inside the plugin. Lucas, have you tried that?
Did somebody have snooping around find that there was a SQL, the option for SQL is in there, but it's not, you can't select it yet or something like that? Because it seems like, to me, this would be ideal once you have a SQL connection for virtual entities and you can use the data export service. Because there you'd have the GUID and you get around the working with the services and Dynamics, because you wouldn't have to authenticate them. You could just read that and get the data.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it's one of the workarounds. The other workaround, more robust, I would say, to delegate your data access to Azure Function. And then use server to server from Azure Function to talk to another instance. But then you need to whole relay in data scenarios. It becomes basically what I wanted to say. It's not an impossible task, but it becomes much more than I envisage. I envisage a very simple, few lines plugin that sucks data out of another system and be done with it. Turns out it's a bit more complicated. Still doable. It's still a good scenario. Just prepare to invest into some development time.
Yeah, it can get into scenarios where it's as much or more work to do that than do a data integration at that point.
Sometimes, yes, sometimes. So, Lucas, you wanted to say something.
Well, I was the way I probably would have approached the problem you mentioned. The other instance. I think Azure Functions probably would have been top of my mind to go through that. But I am curious. I would like to poke at that myself and try to get a feel for why the web API doesn't work from within the plugin.
Here's my developer challenge to Lucas Alexander. Make one instance to talk to another from the plugin.
Well, we'll see what we can do. But I also want to circle back.
Did you hear challenge accepted, Joe? Because that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I think. I mean, whoever solves this challenge, I think would go down in infamy. Would have their name engraved on CRM tip of the day.
On the button. Hey, how about that? Well, I'll chip in to create a button. CRM tip of the day. The hero. We need a new title, like a CRM tip of the day hero.
I guess I have something to do when I get off this podcast. But one thing I want to highlight real quick, Joel, what you were talking about, if you go to a lot of trouble and maybe it's easier to just do a standard data integration. The one thing that you're always going to be able to do with the virtual entities is it's going to look like you're in the same system. And I know that in some cases that doesn't matter, but for a lot of implementations I've done, we wanted to trick the users and make them think that everything was in the same system. So definitely as you're looking at these things, I think you should consider the value of that, of being able to do it that way.
There's more to the cost of an integration than just the development cost too. There's the cost of duplicating your data and potentially things getting out of sync. There's also the time aspect, where if you've got a lot of data to move versus just connect a virtual entity, there's real time versus delay, that could impact business decisions. There's a lot more to it. That the value is there. Data administrators generally love the idea of virtual entities because they don't like to have the same data in multiple places for security reasons, but also data integrity reasons. And that's why I think the idea is solid. It needs a little bit more enhancement to make it really practical for everybody. But they add a couple more data connection types like SQL, and they give more CRUD capabilities through it maybe. That would make it a killer feature.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is when I'm doing technical phone screens for interviewing applicants. A scenario that I've always asked is kind of like my challenge question at the end. Once virtual entities are like fully baked and they can do everything, someone could just answer my question and say, "We'll use virtual entity," and you're done. So I'll have to come up with another challenge question for the end of my phone screen.
Well, go to George's masterclass. He's got a bunch of them. You can steal some of them. This has been CRM Audio, the Dynamics 365 podcast. Send us your feedback at voice@crm.audio. Check out our other shows at crm.audio or subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and any place else podcasts are offered. This podcast is a production of Dynamics Podcast LLC.